I got depressed initially. I didn't
You
know
did?
I didn't know what to do with myself. Right? Like you're sitting out there, okay, you go work in the fields, and then you make your food, and then you go back and work in the fields, and then it's sundown, so you make your food, and you go to sleep. Like the first month was so hard, I went stir crazy. Like it was just very like, it was nerve wracking. I was like, what do I do with myself here? Like, what do I do? When we're unable to change our circumstances, we are forced then to change ourselves. All right. Here we are.
We are back.
We're back.
What are we drinking today?
This is a poppy, or no, this
Olipop,
is
right?
Olipop.
Okay.
This is Olipop crisp apple.
Yeah,
So it's good.
Dude.
Yes,
that is really good. I think my first time trying it.
that's one of my favorites. I think. I like
Yeah.
it. I like
Topping
it.
there.
Yeah,
All
it's,
right.
it's not too sweet. Not too sweet.
It is. Yeah. It's just crisp.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah, crisp
right
apple.
there,
It's good.
as they say. Cool.
Yeah.
Well,
What are we
yeah.
talking about?
well, I actually want to introduce today's topic with a video,
Okay. All right.
and I think that video will just kind of like help us slide right in.
Okay. So I'm on the edge of my seat here. So
Yeah.
you sent me a
so
video.
I did. Yeah, I did send you a
Okay.
video here on. It's a quick short on
Okay.
YouTube.
So I'll pull this up. Okay. Jerry Seinfeld's funny moments. All right. So.
Wherever you are, really anywhere in life, at some point, you got to get the hell out of there. You're at work, you want to get home. You're home, I'm working all week, I got to get out. You're out, it's late, I got to get back. I got to get up, I got to get to the airport. When are we getting on the plane? Plane takes off. When's the plane going to land? Plane lands. Why don't they open the door so we can get out? Nobody wants to be anywhere. Nobody likes anything. We're cranky, we're irritable, and we're dealing with it by constantly changing locations.
All right.
Oh boy.
So I think that was an excellent segment by Jerry,
Yeah.
and just of course judging by the laughs, everyone
Yeah.
gets it.
Yes.
They're like, dude, I get that, and I love that he used a airplane reference because travel can be one of the most like
That's the perfect
classic.
That's the perfect representation.
Right? You're like, when are we boarding? When are we?
Yeah.
When like we're boarding now, but it's taking too long to board. When are we taking off? And I think what the topic here is this contempt for the ordinary that it seems like we have
Yeah.
in our day and age. I don't know if it's a present thing or it's a thing that all humans tend to deal with of like, yeah, like sometimes just ordinary life experiences can seem so unsatisfactory. And so it's this idea of like, what's the next thing? What's the looking forward to the next stimulating or next interesting thing? I'm curious to know if you've seen that with your clients in therapy as well. Because for me, what I'd say I experience it myself, right? And so for me, a lot of what I feel like doing is escaping, right? Escaping into like fantasy land.
Sure.
Right? So like, maybe scrolling through social media or watching a movie or series is going to help me deal with this irritability that I feel with just like just ordinariness, just like life, right? Just doing tasks or sitting there and doing nothing, right? Which, yeah, again, Jerry Seinfeld, I think he just like captured it perfectly.
Yeah.
The general sense that people feel.
Yeah. I think this is a great point to bring up. But to your question of whether or not I see that in people, I think absolutely. And admittedly, I can totally attest to being one of those people on the plane or in the car or in the office or at home.
Or at
right?
home.
Right. I think what has happened is that in today's day and age, we've become so accustomed to things being fast paced and moving all the time. So everything happens with speed. Everything happens with efficiency. The paradigm is on speed and efficiency, right?
Yeah.
The priority is on speed and efficiency and things happening quickly without any lag time, without any wait. I think by nature, everything is being essentially created more and more by man to take away any sense of waiting, right?
Yeah, because there's that kind of implies an inherent problem with waiting.
I would suggest that people have an inherent problem with waiting, but I would also suggest that waiting is an inherent builder, right? We don't know how to have patience anymore as people, right? And I think sometimes, most of the time, waiting facilitates patience like nothing else can.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Now, also intentionally waiting for something. But I think about, again, admittedly myself, I deal with patience in a very real way, or rather lack thereof.
Yeah.
It behooves me to recognize that the best way to get that is to wait.
So you're basically saying there's no other way than to just wait?
To say that there's no other way, I think, is a dangerous thing, perhaps.
Okay, yeah.
But if we're really concerned about efficiency, probably the most efficient way for me to learn that is by waiting. Right?
Yeah.
And I think even in modern psychology, you're familiar with the marshmallow test, right? You tell a kid, hey, I'll give you a marshmallow now, or if you wait, I'll give you 2 in an hour or 5 minutes or whatever the time frame may be that you put for this test, right? Typically, individuals that are able to wait show greater outcomes in terms of success, right? So they would use it as a projective assessment in certain ways, right? Now, as people, many of us want the marshmallow now. Sometimes we're willing to say, okay, I'll take 2 later, right? Now, obviously thinking about marshmallows, it's like not a big deal, but what about 10 grand, 5 grand, 1,000? What about the iPad now on Amazon?
Yeah.
Or I can wait and get it in a
2-day
year.
shipping.
Yeah, 2-day shipping, right? So I think inherently we've forgotten how to have patience. Now, he brings up this another kind of thing, though.
Okay.
And I'm curious, is that the only point that you were curious about? So I'm
no.
Yeah.
Let's start there. So this idea of waiting, right? So going back to some discussion we've had earlier, is a lot of people would say that like our hyper capitalist society creates this environment where it's so hard to just wait, or should be to wait for things, right? So it's this idea of like, giving stuff to you as quick as possible, making stuff as accessible as possible, right? Then go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's a way to phrase it. I would say that that's a human problem and not necessarily a capitalistic problem.
Yeah.
Though sure, like capitalism will feed into it, but I would say that it's a tool like any other that could be exploited.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, that's a human impulse, a desire to have something now versus later.
Right.
You could see it in any society in the world, I think.
Yes.
Right.
Throughout history.
Yes, throughout history, I could tell. Like we've talked, like I lived in Zambia for a time, right? And so and I'm sure you've seen this in Kenya. Like I could tell a man, hey, I'll give you a bushel of bananas now for a sack of mace, or hey, like, or I'll give you 2 tomorrow, and you still give me a sack of maize, right? Like, so like, I think that transcends. Trade the incentive, but I think that transcends where we're talking about now.
Yeah, I think that's an important distinction.
Yes,
that it's a human problem.
Yes,
right? Because I think we often will resort to like, oh, it's social media. It's the fact that the companies have hacked our system, which there again, like, there's elements of truth to that.
Sure.
But it's always been a human problem.
Yeah, I think what companies are doing now is they are now monetizing on that problem, right? And hey, they're taking advantage of that problem, and okay, good for them. That's smart, right? Yeah. That's good business. Yeah. If I know that you have a deficit in some way, and it could make me money, and there's nothing wrong with me saying, okay, well, I'm going to try and see if it's like impulse shopping, right? Why do they put all the candy bars at the front of a store?
Yeah.
Right? Because they're right there as you check out. Anything, like you'll notice next time you walk into a grocery store, next time you walk into any type of store, really, anything that's relatively small, that's accessible, that reaches to impulse, right? They're going to put it right there at the front of the store. Now, conversely, though, in many cases, they may also put many other things that, hey, you actually need towards the back of the store. Yeah. So that you have to walk through the whole store. Exactly. You have to walk through the whole store to get to it. Right? You have to pass all of these incentives in order to get there. Now, obviously, there's other reasons too. You can't have your checkout at the back of the store because then people would steal stuff towards the front of the store. However, at the end of the day, like your checkout aisles are still filled with incentives. Right? Like, hey, do you want this? Do you want that?
The candy, the magazines.
Exactly. Everything there based on impulse.
Feel good stuff.
Yes. And I think that's a human problem that transcends time.
Yeah.
Right? People have become more efficient at exploiting it in the here and now. And I would say largely that's happened due to people being okay with it being exploited. Right? We've become okay with the notion that, well, yeah, sure, I can engage in this impulse buy here. I can buy these magazines. I can buy this candy bar. I can buy 10 of them. Right?
Yeah.
And we've become okay with this idea that we can just purchase and purchase. And I think that also transcends whatever culture. But I think that's largely out of an idea that we are, I think inherently as humans, we are consumers. Like it could be said that, okay, the West is consumers, but I think every culture is consumers. Now, perhaps there's better values placed in certain areas, but I think geographically, if you were to look at a sample size of the same geographic population and populace, like human beings in general are consumers. And to facilitate an attitude that doesn't consume requires some moral implication around why I wouldn't.
Like, why is this helpful? Is this... Yeah. Right. Because even you look at even like, in the Judeo-Christian narrative, in the scriptures, right? You have the people of Israel in the desert. And there's this example of like Moses going up on the mountain to receive God's commands. And like, you're just like, dude, this dude is taking a while,
forever.
Man. And like, you have this, that's just one example. There's so many stories in that narrative. Now, I'm sure you'd find it in other ancient texts too, of the challenge that humans have with patience, with waiting, right? Because it kind of implies some element of letting go of control in a way, right? Of certain outcomes or certain results. And that can be hard to grapple with, and it's like, what do I do, right? And so I'm interested, before you go to your second point on the video, on this subject of waiting, because I see that now applied to like AI and what AI has, and technology in general has allowed us to do. Yeah. I forgot the name. I think it's Andy Crouch. He's a Christian intellectual and thinker. And he talks about how like we are now able to make a difference without becoming different. Yeah. And I was like, that's interesting, because usually that waiting process, it's not like nothing happens during that waiting process. Like you said, there is some work that happens within us during that waiting process. And so I guess it begs the question of like, how do we make sense of new technology like AI and like things we can just do like that, right? Like we can create a story, just type in some thoughts into ChatGPT, and it'll like edit it for you.
Which is wild. I just discovered this.
Right? Yeah, Dale just discovered.
I'm behind the times here.
Yeah.
I could have written like 10 books by now.
Yeah, right, exactly, Dale. You could have. And that's why I was laughing at you with the YouTube video, because I feel like on average, you're probably less plugged into like tech and social media as much as probably most millennials and Gen Zs.
You probably know that better than I do, but I know that
because like I'll tell you about like I just went to watch Mufasa the other day with my wife, and you're like, Oh, Mufasa. Like, that's a movie like that exists? I mean,
Yeah, I had no idea.
Yeah, you're also dealing with raising 4 kids under 6 years old. So
Sure.
6 and under. So it's like, I understand there's life, but I feel in general you're more unplugged than the typical Western millennial or Gen Z.
Yeah, so
And so I was like, maybe Dale doesn't deal with that problem of waiting.
No, I absolutely do.
As much as the tech grabbed,
now maybe
tech addicted people do.
Yeah, maybe it's. I guess that. So, if we're looking at a sample size, then I'd be the wrong person to talk to on this topic, then, right? Because I'm disconnected from the real. But however, at the same time, I would say that if we're talking about it as a human problem, then okay, no, I'm human, right? I can definitely resonate with the notion that no, I want something now. It'd be nice to have it now versus later, right?
Yeah.
If we're given the preference, do you want it now or do you want it later? Most of us impulsively choose now, right? Unless we can think of a very good reason, right? That's very powerful indeed to have it later, right?
And that, I feel like that's the key, right?
Yeah.
What? Because then the question is, what are the good reasons to wait? Because there's some things like, okay, I just need to microwave my oatmeal. I'm not gonna make my.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna spend time cooking my oatmeal on the stove.
Unless we believed that like microwaves were gonna get in my oatmeal.
Okay, so that's where.
Which used to be a thing, I think. I don't know that people actually believe that still.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I know some.
Maybe there's
people
some.
do. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like, like what are the good reasons to wait for some things and for others not?
Yeah. I mean, I think depending on what we're talking about, right? Again, if we're talking about in a financial sense, if we're talking about in a character sense, again, coming back to the idea of patience, I think part of the reason that we would is because there's few other ways to really facilitate that process besides waiting, right? There's few other ways to really get acquainted with the idea of patience besides having to go through it and build it, right? You can't get patience by getting it quicker. It's like an oxymoron. It doesn't work.
Right.
The whole idea implicates that you have to utilize it in order to get it. You have to practice it in order to receive it, right? And by paying in that dividend, then you start to receive interest.
Yeah. Because I guess the implication is that it sounds like we're not very happy with things that maybe we could be happy with.
Yeah.
Because because of this, like, we want the next thing.
Yeah, I think that's
the contentment is lacking.
Yes. I would say that's a point largely that comes from people wanting to be extraordinary. Right. Because I think if we look back, okay, so culturally, again, whether we were talking about, and now certainly I would say perhaps in Western culture, this idea might be more prominent than in other cultures, though I do think that even across the board, this is a human thing. Dependent on, you could fix the dial, and I'm interested to hear your comment on this, but I would say from a cultural standpoint and a human standpoint, there is a pressure put on to exceed, right? To excel, to not be average. Right? Now, certainly that exists here. I'm curious, did you see that in Kenya?
Oh, very much so, yeah.
Right. Don't be ordinary.
Right. It's going to be the first in your class, right? And in Kenyan schooling, we still have the ranking system.
Okay, tell me about that.
Right. So
I don't know what
like,
you mean. Yeah.
Yeah. So like in the local education system, you still very much have the ranking system of like who comes first for certain exams, from primary school, elementary school, all the way up to high school, and even I think in university. And it's the whole goal is like you aspire to be the first, right? To excel.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, I mean, that's just one example.
Yeah.
In many areas, but I think you find it everywhere, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that part of what happens with that is that eventually people become disillusioned because they discover that after striving to do all these things and be the first in everything, right? Eventually they determine and discover that they're not actually satisfied with life, right? unless they've met certain other values. But doing the single one value of excelling doesn't provide the satisfaction that perhaps they had been trained that it would or should. I think that if we were to look at, again, we talked about Malcolm Gladwell in the past, in terms of outliers, in terms of, okay, levels of satisfaction. Even 20 years ago, they used to say that, okay, probably not 20, it was like 15 years ago, I believe the statistic came out regarding happiness. Like if you made over $75,000 a year, right, your level of satisfaction in life was no different than if you made than if you made 200,000. Now, I would wager that amount has gone up now.
Yeah, I think
it's probably more like 125 or something like that. Yeah, but again, right, like if we're at that space, that would imply that levels of satisfaction aren't tied to achievement. Right? But yet still, we're still chasing this illusory dragon of saying, okay, well, I can't be ordinary, right? I can't be average. And I think what's hard about that is that people quite literally lose themselves and they lose their uniqueness in trying to not be unique.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Right? Or rather, excuse me, in trying to be unique, they lose their uniqueness.
Yes.
Right? So they're striving so hard to say, okay, I'm going to be the best. I'm going to be on top. I'm going to be the one. I'm going to be different. But they miss the point that they're already different. There's already uniqueness there. And in their journey to do so, they completely lost it. Right? I think something that we've missed is that there are parts of average that's very good. In many ways, it's good to be one among.
One among many.
One among many.
Yeah. Yeah, for some people, that's like, ew.
Oh, it's death.
That's like giving up.
Yeah.
Because that's what the messages you're getting on social media.
Exactly. That's the idea.
Everyone wants to be an influencer. Everyone wants to have fame. It's your
it's like
count.
you ask like the average, I feel like, collegiate student in media. Okay, is that Gen Z? Is that what that generation is called? Okay.
Want to be a YouTuber.
Yeah, they want to be a YouTuber or do a podcast, right?
Yeah.
Which is so funny. Obviously, okay, now we're doing a podcast here, so I'm like falling into this trap here. But this is for advertising.
Yeah, right.
But I will say this is the last thing that I saw myself doing, not the first thing. Nowhere near.
Not the first.
No. So this, I would say, ideally things happen out of an organic growth piece that happens naturally because it was something that came at the right time. Right? And I would say that's where patience is vitally important. And that's where true uniqueness can come to play because many of us try so hard to put a square peg in a round hole, right? And we do that by striving and doing. And great, yeah, we made a lot of money. We made good marks. Where are you at now? What do you have to show for it?
Yeah. Exactly.
Are your kids any happier? Are you any happier? Actually, right?
Right. But then it's like, but then I just have to reach this next milestone.
Yeah.
Then we can.
The next thing, and then we can calm down.
And relax and actually focus on what's actually happening here.
Yeah.
Because I'm not yet at that 75,000 mark, right? That everyone says I need to be at. And it's like, I can't enjoy until I've reached.
Yeah.
It's
a very sad thing in reality. I think a lot of it comes from not necessarily, because don't hear me wrong, I think there's extreme value in being able to say, okay, I'm going to try to do better than I did before. Right? But I think part of the problem is we're not trying to do better than we did before. We're trying to do better than the next guy.
Yes.
Right? Now, it's been said, okay, records were meant to be broken. I believe that's true, but I don't believe how you break them is focusing on them. Right? I believe how you break them is focusing on you and doing better than, hey, what you did before. And then organically you see what happens. Hey, look, you broke it. You didn't even know it.
Yeah. Right.
Right.
Yeah. You didn't even know it. You were just
you just ran your race.
Yeah.
Right. And I would say that that's the unfortunate part is it's not that we are necessarily focused on, hey, how can we do better than what we did yesterday? We're focused on, oh, well, that person has that. How can I do just as good as that? Or just as good as them?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm.
You could say comparison is the thief of joy.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Because then what to me what it points to is finding, because we're talking about the desire to be extraordinary, and that maybe the ordinary is fine, right? But then there's also the idea of finding the extraordinary in the ordinary.
Exactly.
Right?
Yes.
Because I feel like that idea, like you said, of being extraordinary is just inherently human as well, right? Is that we seek to excel, to go past our limits.
Sure.
But then it's maybe co-opted when we're like, oh no, but then that means you can never be content until you've reached, versus like, no, how can I find the extraordinary now in my ordinary circumstance?
Yeah.
Right.
I think it's interesting because I think that if first we, and I guess, thinking about, I think about a children's book, and I've talked about them before, but I really am super fond of C.S. Lewis, so I'm going to talk about him again.
Yeah. I got a few quotes as
Okay. So we're on the same train here. It sounds like. Okay. So the one I'm thinking of essentially is The Horse and His Boy, right? You have this horse named Bree, right? And at the end of the book, essentially the story goes that the horse did something that he felt cowardice as a result of doing, right? So throughout the story, he sees himself as this war horse, right? He's striving. He is going to this place. He's on a mission, right? Okay. And then he makes a mistake. And his mistake isn't necessarily one that we would constitute as, this huge moral failing, but he runs from a lion, right? And the lion is attacking two of his friends, but he's scared, so he runs, right?
Yeah.
The boy on his back jumps off.
Yes.
And goes to help the friends.
Yes.
Right. And that's the moment that he feels bad. Right. As he describes, he's like, I was beaten by a small boy, a common boy. Right? Right. What am I now? Right. And there's essentially a hermit he is what we might constitute a sage in the book, right, and offering some wisdom. And so Breeze, he's supposed to go on his quest and continue on towards this land that he was trying to get to. We could call it like the promised land, right? In the story, it's Narnia. He's trying to get to Narnia, right? But he says, well, no, I'm no good now. I could not be seen there now. Not in this state, not like this. Right. Not carrying this. Right. I could not be seen among them. And the hermit's like, basically tells him to shut up. like dude, he's like, relax. Yeah. He basically says it, and I'm going to botch this slightly, but he basically surmises to say, the problem is that you thought you were very good. And that you treated yourself as if you were quite good indeed. But maybe if you understand that you're actually just average, you could be quite good. Oof. Right. Wow. Yeah. And so that it's like, oh man, okay. Like, huge cut to the horse's pride. Yeah. Because he did what any other horse would do. He ran from a lion. Right? In a moment of weakness. Right? And then he carried so much shame to say, well, no, I could never be that person. Right. I've betrayed who I was, as if to say that he wasn't capable of making a mistake because he was too high and mighty to make a mistake. But as we've talked about in previous episodes, right? Yeah. This is a very dangerous game to play, to say, well, I could never do that. Right. I would never be caught doing that. Yeah. No, perhaps if you understand that actually you could be.
And that's ordinary.
And that's
an ordinary
thing.
Play.
Yes. Then you might have a chance at being a quite decent person. Right.
Wow. Yeah.
And so I think that the gift of average is the fact that if we understand that, no, I'm probably not that special, and understand where we're at in a way, then we might actually do something special.
Yeah.
But it wasn't by aiming for something special or thinking a lot of ourselves.
Yeah.
It was just a byproduct.
Right. Of that. It's that idea of like, if you're trying to look like the smartest person in the room, you are hindering yourself from becoming smart in the first place.
100%.
Because you're now not asking the questions. You're trying to show like you're the one that doesn't, you just answer, right?
Yeah.
So you're not learning. You're just trying to posture as, right? So it's like, it's actually working against you.
100%. 100%.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Yeah. That's because I'm trying to connect back to where we were before this story. I wanted to say something that it's gone.
We were talking about ordinary.
Yes.
We were talking about average.
Yes. Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. Because, if you took anyone from 200, 300 years ago and you put them in 2024, I mean, almost every facet of our daily experience to them would appear extraordinary.
100%.
They'd be like, what? You're like driving in a 2-ton metal box at this mile per hour. No one's crashing. Like, you're able to get here. You're able to fly in a plane. You're able to, do all these things. Right. And this idea of like familiarity breeds contempt. And it's like, that's where it's like, how do we not take for granted the everyday experiences that we go through? And where do we draw the line of like, okay, what is pathology and what's like just a regular
what's
problem?
wrong? Because am I bad or wrong for taking this for granted?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Right. As well,
Should I be appreciating more?
Or even it's like, would this make me happier if I just did? If I this was more content with this day-to-day living?
I would say that we could always be more content. Right? Because I think contentment is a value, right? It's something.
So it is a value, yeah.
100%.
It's a value.
Yeah.
So it's like the endless pursuit of it.
I would say that if we want more satisfaction out of life, we would pursue, hey, let's work to recognize not what we're owed, but what's been given that we could be grateful for. Right? And that's quite literally everything.
Yeah.
Right? In the sense that, yes, we've worked
quite literally everything.
Right. In the sense we could say, okay, well, yeah, I've worked hard, but that's a gift in of itself, like that I could work hard, right? That I could do something, right? I can be grateful for that.
Yeah.
And appreciate the fact that I can even do it.
Yeah.
Right. Appreciate the fact that I can even get up and go to work. Right. And so I think that's a very different paradigm
to operate from.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's in many ways it's not circumstantial.
No.
And that's the thing, is like from the Jerry Seinfeld thing, is like we want to keep changing our location. Basically saying we want to keep changing our circumstance. Because if we just change our circumstance, then we'll just feel less irritable, feel less anxious, or dissatisfied, or content.
There is a quote slipping me. I want to say that it was either, and this is going to be a very large disparity, but I'm sure many of if there's other therapists or just other folks that have heard this quote listening, I'm sure they're going to know as soon as I say it. But essentially, how it goes is that when we're unable to change our circumstances, and that actually may be Frankl, we are forced then to change ourselves.
I think it's Frankl.
Pretty sure it's Frankl.
Yeah.
Now that I say that, because I'm looking at Man's Search for Meaning right now, and I'm like, I'm pretty sure he said that. Like,
on the bookshelf.
So, but I think that is so highly relevant.
Yeah.
Right. And I think the reason, or I would guess a big reason for that, and I would actually, no, I think to a certain degree, I've experienced this too, just in my time in Zambia. I lived in a very different environment than I do now. Like, it was a bush village. Right?
Yeah.
And so many of the amenities that we had, like, I got depressed initially. I didn't know.
Did?
I didn't know what to do with myself. Right. Even as like, and this was like 20 years ago. Right.
Yeah. Before.
And so it's like,
before all
or I should say it was like 17 years ago. But yeah, I didn't know what to do with myself. Like, you're sitting out there. Okay, you go work in the fields, and then you make your food. And then you go back and work in the fields, and then it's sundown.
You go to bed.
So you make your food, and you go to sleep.
Done.
And that's it. Like,
simple.
I went
very simple.
Like, the first month was so hard, I went stir crazy. Like, it was just very, like, it was nerve wracking. I was like, what do I do with myself here? Like, what do I do? Right. What I learned to do was just do that. Right. And I, like, my bath that I took every day, like, it was at the base of a waterfall. Right. So I went and dove in this water. Yeah. In the river, basically. And it was funny, though, because the locals wouldn't swim there because there was water monitors and snakes and stuff. But they weren't like big.
The white Mzungu.
Yeah. That's exactly. And they're like, this guy's crazy.
Like...
Yeah. They're like, what an idiot. Like, and I was like, hey, this is cool.
Yeah.
Such a foreigner. Right. And yeah. And needless to say, though, like, after a while, though, the simplicity of it was something that was, like, very nice. So much so that when I came back, I remember stepping off the plane and into Washington Dulles Airport, and I was like, whoa. Like, even that short time that I experienced being in a very isolated environment, a very different pace, was so rattling. Right. I remember I remember this is clear as day, like, coming and, like, going to eat breakfast. My mother-in-law took me out for breakfast because, like, yeah, she was just a nice thing to do. So she picked me up from the airport, and I went out to breakfast, and there was this massive plate of food in front of me. And I was like, whoa, I haven't eaten like this in months. Like, I don't even, like, what do I...
Delectable.
And needless to say, I gorged myself. Like I just... Yeah. I was like, this is fantastic. I don't even remember the last time I had eggs. Like,
whoa.
Because you could buy eggs, obviously, in Zambia, but, you know, they have them in, like, little plastic bags, like, 2 at a time. Like, and it's like... Yeah, and that's what it was, right? I had my Shima and my relish, and, like, that was it. Wow. But, yeah, I think that experience in and of itself, though, like, definitely, I think, speaks to this notion of adjusting to simplicity. But even there, though, and this is why I say, like, I think this is a human problem rather than a societal problem, because, like, you'd have people that couldn't buy food, but they had talk time. Right. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, they couldn't afford the shoes on their feet, but they had talk time for their cell phone.
Yes.
And you're like,
right. You're like, dude.
What are you talking? Because they wanted to be as those in the city.
Exactly.
Right. That was what they were striving for.
Aspiring.
That's what they were aspiring to. They all wanted to get out of the bush.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay,
right. That's
great.
The goal.
And it's so funny because on all of our children's movies, right? It's like, you see so many, it's like, oh, I want to leave this island, or I want to leave this village. And it's like, why? Right. And it's like, it's making a show of, oh, well, if you stay there, then that's bad. Like, you're settling for less. And it's like, well, wait, maybe that's more. Maybe less is actually more here. Right. It's not to say that there isn't exceptions to these pieces. It's not to say, sure, like, it's good to strive, but it is to say that, hey, sometimes simplicity is really good.
Yeah. Yeah. Speaking to that, the rule aspiring to be urban.
Yeah.
Like, if it's interesting to see in my family, right?
Yeah.
Looking back at the generations, like, my grandparents' parents were farmers out of necessity, not because of or hunter gatherers, right? Then my grandparents kind of graduated to being like knowledge workers. So like my grandfather was a pastor.
Okay.
On my paternal grandfather. My mom's grandparents were farmers.
Okay.
Right. So my grandfather is a pastor on my dad's side. They still live in the rural area. They still do farming and all that. Then he gives birth to my dad and siblings, and they all became came to the city. They were the first to deal with a computer, first to fly in a plane, first to do all these things. And now I'm raised completely removed from like rural Africa, which is still majority of people in Africa are farmers and live in the rural areas. But I was raised in the city as a city boy. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
And so what was interesting is that you now have a return of people going back into farming. Yeah. Into wanting to move out of the city.
Sure.
To a return to simplicity, because now that's out of the fact that it's now an option.
Yeah.
Because before then it was like, this is all I have. This is all I know. Let me go experience this opportunity. Yeah. And then now it's like, okay, I have all this, but I want to return to simplicity. It was just very fascinating.
Oh, 100%.
Right? Like,
I think there's many that I've known and still know that, okay, they decide to live in ways that are way more simple and way more basic and way more rural.
Yeah.
Out of his desire for satisfaction, for simplicity, right? Or at least I would presume that, right? Yeah. I can't say that I've had this type of conversation with all of them, so. Okay. Now, I will say that I think that's definitely visible in the States. I don't know this, but I would imagine if you were to do like a TikTok search or a Instagram search of like, I don't know, people doing like farmettes or hobby farming or homestead, I'm sure it would be like crazy.
I can give you the names right now.
Okay. So it sounds like there's some truth.
It's satisfying too. Yeah. People love, there's this like YouTuber, a guy in Alaska with his kids.
Okay.
And it's like very off grid and people love watching that stuff. Like it's like therapy. Yeah. Like you just go on YouTube. Dude has millions of subscribers. And he lives off the grid with his like 2-year-old and 5-year-old. They're camping. They're hunting and cooking. And people just love watching that stuff.
Yeah. It's making a ton of money.
And you're like, yeah,
that's great.
It's great, dude.
That's great.
But it's like the fascination.
Yeah.
That's the fantasy. That's the new fantasy. Yeah. It's the simplicity is what you fantasize about.
That's interesting.
Isn't that crazy? Like the fantasy is so changed.
Well,
in a way,
I think that I wonder if it's changed so much as we've understood that that actually is real.
Ooh, yes.
Right. Perhaps we're coming to understand now that, wait, it wasn't so much fantasy. It was a story that perhaps was fantasy because it was something that wasn't true to us right now, but it actually could be.
Yeah.
Right. I think so. You sent me this little article here, and I couldn't help but look at it.
Okay. Good.
And you're asking, like, I believe you listed some quotes from Lewis.
Yeah, Lewis. Yeah, he was writing about stories and myth and fantasy.
Yes, and he tells here he's talking because I remember reading this in The Abolition of Man. I believe was he talking about it?
Well, yeah.
So he's talking about the necessity to be able to keep fantasy alive in children, and also for like because during that time in England, like there was, I think, intellectualism was like heavily on board, like trying to essentially push lots of metric based things, but essentially
like the idea of fiction.
Yes, like and saying that those were just not helpful for children learning. And now
and people still make that argument today.
Yes.
That like we shouldn't indulge in that because it's escaping in a way.
I think that the way that we indulge in that today is different.
Okay.
So I think that the way that we indulge in that is different than it was during that time. Gotcha. Today, we become engrossed in a type of technology that actually tries to encapsulate its own reality.
Oh,
right.
Okay. Right.
As opposed to being engrossed in a piece of literature
Yes.
that is asking you to shape the reality.
That's
it is
true.
asking
Literature it does have.
it is
it's
asking
different when
you
read.
to create the story in your
Yeah.
mind.
Right.
It is asking you to put those walls up. It's asking you to
Mm.
facilitate that process,
Mm.
right?
Right.
As opposed to providing the picture and you step into it.
That's different.
It's very different.
Mhm.
And Lewis's argument is that that process is hugely important, right? That process, because he's quite literally talking about that is what fantasy is, right? So
Yeah, you want to read it?
to look at this, he's saying the value of myth is that it takes all the things we know and restores them to rich significance, which has been hidden by the veil of familiarity, right? So the child enjoys his cold meat, otherwise dull to him, by pretending it's buffalo, just killed with his own bow and arrow. And the child is wise. The real meat comes back to him more savory for having been dipped in a story. You might say that only then is it the real meat. If you're tired of the real landscape, look at it in a mirror. By putting bread, gold, horse, apple, or the very road into a myth, we do not retreat from reality. We rediscover it.
Ooh.
Right. And
Wow.
I think what he's describing there is you are rediscovering it in your mind.
Yes.
Right. That's something that you are doing. Now, obviously, the same tool,
Yeah.
right? I would say that these things are tools.
They're tools.
You can have bad stories.
Yeah.
Right. You can have bad myths.
Yeah, you can have some
right?
bad myths out there, yeah.
Right. But I think at the end of the day, right, another thing he's famous for saying is that if children are going to come across terrible tyrants and terrible times, and I'm misquoting this here, but he says, let them at least have heard of brave knights and heroes.
Ooh, yeah.
Right.
Cool.
But the moral of what he's saying there is that that's the value of story. Let them at least have heard of a story in time where bravery exists and how it looks, right? Obviously, we're both Christian here.
Yeah.
And so, like, as someone who reads the Bible and appreciates the words of Jesus, right?
Yeah.
Like, Jesus spoke in parables.
Right.
He told stories.
Yeah. Very effective.
Right? It was hugely effective because stories are effective. He understood that people needed to be able to create that landscape to a degree in their own mind. If we were to ask 10 different people, hey, tell me the story of, say, the prodigal son, and ask them to like paint pictures of it,
So many different
all of them
versions.
would be different.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But they would be each significant to that individual.
Yes.
Right? If we were asking them to narrate, hey, what's the voice you hear in your head? Right? The reason that's significant is because that individual picks out one that's poignantly directed to them. And no game can do that. No movie can do that.
Right. Because it's the reality's created.
Yes.
Yeah. And there's studies showing that, right? That there's a difference between like reading and like watching a film. Like,
I'm
it's
sure
not
that there
as
is. I don't
distinct.
doubt that.
But because of that, because when you read, you're co-creating the reality.
Exactly. There's certainly
as
studies, the same thing with like, say, writing versus typing, right? As far as retention.
Yeah. Yeah.
When you write, right? Like there's more retention as opposed to when you type, right? Or when you speak. Now, granted, no, I think that's a huge.
That's huge. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's because again, like we're actively engaging in that versus like passively consuming. I think it speaks to the fact that fantasy in and of itself, how you engage with it, again, is not the problem. It's not the fantasy itself is not the problem, or the myth is not the problem, but how one engages with it.
Yes.
And what effect does it have on your reality?
Yes.
Outside of that.
Yes.
Right.
And I think, well, so it's interesting because he talks about it like we rediscover reality, right?
Yes.
So if what we take from a video game is that we're rediscovering this reality in our current world, right? We could be rediscovering the wrong reality. Right. Or creating the wrong reality. But if what we take from a fantasy story, say with good values and illustrating ideas that are important, then that's what we recreate in reality, because those things are true.
Yeah.
And I think that's hugely important. I think, especially for children,
Especially
because if I watch my kids, right, all of them, like, they play in fantasy so often, and what they want every night. This is very interesting. They don't want to hear a story from, say, someone like off of the internet, or like some televised story or something like that. What they want, now I think there's a number of reasons for this, but I think this is an interesting one. What they want is they want us to tell them a story. Right? They want to hear a story
from
me. Right? That's new, that's significant. And I think there's a number of reasons for that. Perhaps one, okay, I'm a paternal figure. Right. That voice is unique in their mind and providing a unique story to this. But also, like, they want to create something that they haven't seen before.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so these other stories, like, have all these characters' voices and places and things, all good. But the more that they can create in their own mind and be able to provide context to these characters, the better. Right? And also, obviously, they want mom and dad, and they want their time. Right?
Right.
But again, I think that's also just equally as significant. Right?
Yeah.
Whenever we read a book, like, I think each one of us, we would have a voice that's essentially reading that aloud in your mind.
Yes.
Right? Whose voice is that? Is it yours? Is it your father's? Is it somebody else's? Is it an amalgamation of those? Right? And so I think those things are significant, but especially in terms of what he said. Now, this is interesting because you have a quote here.
Okay. Yeah.
Also by Freud.
Yes, by Freud. I had to bring up Freud.
Yeah.
I got to know what Freud thinks.
Yeah. Well, and I think
I wouldn't be a therapist.
I think that this is actually a little bit unique because you said, okay, human beings find reality unsatisfying quite generally, and for that reason, entertain a life of fantasy in which we like to make up for the insufficiencies of reality. I think that largely is true. I also think that in a certain way, Lewis didn't disagree with a lot of that.
Yes.
Right? But I think what we find here is the difference between the two of them might be, okay, Freud is talking about the pathology of people, right?
Yes.
Of, okay, they're going to create a fantasy that satiates the current moment, that provides satiation for the fact of my pain. Right. Lewis talked about a reality that would inspire.
Yes.
Right. In what he describes, I believe, he's talking about a reality that's going to inspire the reader of what life can be, of what this mystery can be, of that hunt, what it could be.
Yeah.
Right. And I think with Freud, it was very much in a notion to bring out the point that, okay, people will fantasize to be able to remove the burden of the pain that they feel with something that's simply satiating. Sex, drugs, money. Those were the most common, I think, especially that he would point to say, okay, well, trying to provide a temporary reality, right?
Yeah.
And
to escape the insufferable.
Exactly. Right. It was like a bad Dostoevsky novel, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Which we'll have to review in the future because I think Dostoevsky has some great points to bring out.
Yeah.
But I think that's the difference with Lewis is that, okay, he's talking about something, understanding what can be, right? There's a utility in fantasy if it leads you in value.
Yeah. If it leads you in value. Yeah. Wow. That's good. Right? Because I think that's finding the extraordinary in the ordinary.
Exactly.
Right? And I think in many ways that practice, because it is a practice, right? It is a intent. It doesn't come by autopilot. It is one of intention, especially as adults. I think children have a way of just naturally, you know, like being imaginative and like he talked about the meat. So the meat is a buffalo, and I've heard some of your kids talk about stuff of like, like they'll read, you know, David and Goliath, and then like transpose that into their experience of like, I'm going to protect the chicken in the yard from the fox. I'm like, dude, I love this.
No, it's so true too. Like my daughter, right? She gets this bow and arrow for like, she gets a bow and arrow, right?
Yeah.
And she's like, okay, Dad, I'm going to go kill a fox with this bow and arrow. I said, Avery, that won't kill a fox. She was crushed. It won't kill a fox? Why do I have this? Like, it's just, okay. Like, as soon as she came to terms, okay, I accept this. I want a slingshot. Right? Like, so she gets a slingshot. Daddy, will this hurt a fox? Yeah, that could hurt a fox. Okay. I want to use my slingshot. She has a full-blown slingshot, right? We can't shoot it inside because it will cause damage.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, but quite literally, she wanted a slingshot like David. And I was like, okay, we have to make some tweaks here.
Yeah.
Right.
We might have
but you can have a slingshot tweaks. Because again, like, I think the value in that for a child like her is for her to be able to understand both protection and also for her to be able to understand the utility of danger, right? And what that looks like. And the fact that she herself can be someone who protects, I think is huge for a child.
Yeah.
Right? And also she herself is someone who could be harmed. Right? Huge lessons. Anyways.
Wow. It's amazing. Yeah. It's amazing how kids just naturally...
They come to conclusions that it baffles me.
Right. Versus I think with us adults, it's like we have to be a bit more intentional.
Yeah.
To find that same level of like, extraordinary in our day-to-day experiences, right? Like, you know, a lot of therapists will talk about gratitude journals, right?
Sure.
But encouraging that sense of reflection.
Yeah.
And then also just like, like engaging with maybe material, like some like fantasy material with values that can actually help you get back into reality in a way that's inspiring. Yes. That is not you just like trying to escape your suffering.
Exactly. And I think that's inadvertently going to address the suffering. Because what it does is it provides you with movement and inspiration to move.
Yeah.
It provides a calling. Right. And I think that's huge because it puts to language, right, something that we previously couldn't articulate.
Wow. That's good.
Yeah. But I guess we're out of time. Right. So we'll touch more on more great works here, but I appreciate you bringing that up. That was great.
Yeah. No, it's, man, some of these thinkers, you're like, how do they come up with this stuff?
They read a lot. They wrote a lot of stories.
Hey, well, I guess that's what we should.
I need to read more.
Yeah, exactly. Moral of the story.
Yeah, read more. Right.